Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first Tech Talk in our week-long series covering tech topics in a laid-back atmosphere. My name is Seth Powell, and I'm the Sales Engineering Manager at Atlona. I'll be the host on every session this week. The ultimate goal of these sessions is to do a technical overview of products in an application format. We will first review a real design application and then answer questions both in interview format and from the audience. Speaking of audience questions, if you have a question throughout the duration of our live stream, please ask away in the comments. We'll make sure we leave plenty of time at the end to answer these questions. I'd like to take a second and say thank you for attending AtlonaCom 2020. We have Tech Talks planned every single day at this time, and I hope you can attend more than just this one, as they all offer unique discussions that you'll only find here. While you're on the AtlonaCom site, make sure you schedule a booth tour with your favorite Atlonian. Nick and I are both available for scheduling if you aren't sure who to choose. And one quick housekeeping item, if you are watching this from the AtlonaCom landing page and want to ask a question, you'll need to click on the YouTube title to navigate to the actual stream on YouTube so that you can enable commenting. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into our Tech Talk. So today we're discussing the merging of soft and hard codecs with Nick Bethard, a senior sales engineer at Atlona. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Nick. Nick, what's going on? You're muted, Nick.
Oops, sorry about that. Rookie mistake. So hi, everybody. I'm Nick, and for those of you that haven't seen or met me before, I'm like Seth said, I'm a senior sales engineer here with Atlona. I've been with Atlona for I don't know, 4 or 5 years now, and actually came over as a product manager working with the OmniStream product line for a number of years before I kind of shifted over to sales engineering to have a little bit more fun with system design stuff and more holistic customer-facing stuff. So today, like Seth said, we're going to be talking a little bit about merging soft and hard codecs with a clear focus on Cisco hard codecs. So everything that we're going to talk about today has to do with Cisco. Some of it will, have application to potentially other hard codecs, but again, today we're going to be focused on Cisco stuff because those are, everywhere. So with that, let me go ahead and pull up an and show you guys what, here, let me go full screen on this so it'll be a little bit easier for you to see. And I'm going to talk about a couple of different systems today, but to start, we're going to start with this idea of a system based around one of the current generation Cisco codecs, the WebEx Rootkit. So the WebEx Rootkit, for those that don't know, the WebEx Rootkit is really a Cisco hard codec in a box, so to speak. It's sort of a soundbar type format, has a camera in the middle, mic, speakers, everything built in, but it also has a lot of functionality that we can exploit to, kind of have a room that becomes a merger of hard and soft codecs. And by that I mean, an end user could potentially come into the room and and choose, right, whether they're going to do a WebEx meeting via the Cisco codec, or if let's say they need to do a Teams meeting as an example. For whatever reason, to be able to plug their computer in and still leverage the same hardware and infrastructure that's built into the room to have, those other soft codec based meetings. So, what we have here, what we end up here, with this sort of setup, we have, our WebEx Rootkit is kind of the center of the system. But we've got a few things going on. We also have, an external DSP that's driving a microphone on the table, on the conference table, and speakers in the ceiling, and that's enabling us to, have one set of mic and speakers that everyone's using, whether it's for the Cisco codec or for soft codecs, and then also having one of our HDVS cam pan tilt zoom capable cameras, mounted likely near the TV, maybe right above it, so that when somebody connects up their soft codec, they have that as a camera option, because there's Cisco doesn't give you a way to access the camera that's built into the WebEx Rootkit. So we've got to have an HDVS cam there to provide that functionality. Now we've also got some interesting functionality here, because we've got a table input, at the conference room table, and we also have a room PC. So, so a user can come in and either use their PC, or they can use a room PC for soft codec stuff if they want to, or for sharing content or whatever, and to be able to automatically switch between those, using the system. So the other thing that that I'd like to point out here that's pretty interesting and neat about this sort of system is we have all of this going on, right? We have the small little Atlona receiver switch. We have a DSP. We have an Atlona Gain 60 amplifier, HDVS cam, and if you notice, the only touch panel that I show here is a Cisco Touch 10. Now, that's important to note, because what that means is we've got integration between the two systems. We've got integration between the Cisco system, the Cisco telepresence system, and the Atlona system, so that we can basically drive everything, even the non-Cisco equipment, we can drive via the Cisco Touch 10, so that there doesn't have to be multiple control interfaces, sitting on the table. So if somebody walks in the room and they want to do a Cisco meeting, they use the Touch 10 just like they would normally. But if somebody comes in the room and they want to use the system for soft codec, then there's controls available on the Touch 10 to facilitate that. So that's in a nutshell what we're going to be talking about. So with that, I'll kind of open it up to kind of start going through some questions.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate that. So I'll kind of cut back to you and I here, but we can certainly go back to the drawing if at any point, something that we're talking about requires going back to the drawing. I guess first and foremost, kind of going through that, looking at a system like this, My first question would kind of be if we have a Cisco codec already in the system, what is the reason that we may also want to have a soft codec in the system as well? What would be the reasoning behind wanting to have both of those?
It's a really good question. And 6 months ago, I would have the same answer, but it would be less convincing. But now in the modern day and times, we're now living in post-COVID land, and the world's a very different place. Lots and lots of remote meetings. So it's very, very common now, just as we're doing this interaction, via this system. It's very, very common now for meetings to be heavier on the remote side than they are on the local side. And so where in the past, an organization, let's say you have a large organization and they've standardized on Cisco codecs across the board, that enables them to have, very easy, very high quality meetings inside their organization, in a quick and intuitive manner. And in the past, if somebody wanted to use a different system, maybe they could, or maybe they just joined it from their desk, because it didn't happen all that often, right? Most of the time, you could probably tell, the other person, hey, I want to use WebEx. Well, now in post-COVID land, things are a bit different, right? So everybody has their soft codec of choice, whether it's WebEx or Teams or Zoom or Ring Central or whatever, right? I don't care what it is. Soft codec of choice. Most companies are standardizing on one thing or the other. You have some companies that are standardized on Cisco, obviously. You have some that are standardized on Teams, some that are standardized on Zoom, etc., right? And so by adding this functionality to have a room that that has capability to do not just Cisco WebEx, but also any other soft codec, using the high quality peripherals built into the room, much better experience than what you get with built-in camera, mic, and speakers on your laptop. It enables people to be able to use whatever codec they want, right? Whether it's the Cisco codec, or let's say they need to join a Teams meeting, they come in, they plug in, and join the Teams meeting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually have recently worked on a larger project for an end user that was their reasoning. It was less sort of COVID related, although I'm sure that that's sort of top of everybody's mind now. It was more of they actually, there were two organizations, right, that were merging. One had recently been bought by the other. And the guy who was managing the AV side was not sure yet what the sort of organization at large, the new combined orgs, were going to do in terms of what direction they were going to take with soft codec conferencing. In this particular instance, they had been using I think it was either Zoom Room or something like that in almost more of a hard codec type of solution, like we talk about with Zoom Room and Zoom Room integration. Right. But the other organization was sort of embedded with Teams. And so the question is sort of, how do you put together this system that allows you to sort of incorporate many different types of conferencing all in one, and kind of one solution where it's really whatever the user of the system at the time wants to use, they can use, right? So kind of a similar situation. Yeah. Cool. Right. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Did you have something else to say?
No, I was just gonna, just kind of, to kind of back, reiterate, along the lines of what you were saying, again, the way that this kind of system, that we're talking about here would get used, is again, a customer, or not a customer, but an end user, would come into the room, just like you were saying, and if they have a WebEx meeting, they sit down, they use the Cisco telepresence system just like they always would. But if they need to join some other soft codec, and at this point it doesn't matter what that soft codec is. It could be Teams, it could be Zoom, it could be Ring Central, it could be anything. They just sit down with their laptop, they plug in HDMI, they plug in USB, and as soon as they plug in USB, they get all of the high quality peripherals built into the room, so that they have a really great experience both for themselves and for the far end, regardless of what codec they happen to need to use.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a point that I was going to make, and it's sort of left me. So I have another question. So I'll ask the other question, and if the point comes back around, then we'll toss it out there.
Sure.
So I guess like the next question is sort of related to audio, right? Which is a bit, it's a bit out there for us in general, seeing as we're not manufacturing DSPs, we're not really playing heavily in the conference audio space necessarily, but in a conferencing environment, audio is going to be super important, right? So on our side, what you and I do on a day-to-day basis in designing systems and understanding how they're going to integrate, it is important for us to always keep these things in mind, right? So with that in mind, how does audio in this kind of a system work, right? Speakers and microphone and whatnot. How are we integrating that stuff in a system like this?
It's a good question.
And by the way, if you need me to pull your screen back up, let me know and I can.
Yeah, so it's definitely a spot on question, because you kind of hit on it. Anybody out there that's ever done integration of these kinds of conference rooms that lean on codec use, whether it's soft codec, hard codec, or both, the audio side of things, almost sometimes even more so than the video side, becomes the pain point for end users, right? If it works great, it works great, and everybody's super happy. And if it works anything less than great, then end users get so pissed off it's ridiculous, because it just completely ruins the entire experience. So that's key when you're doing a room like this. Trying to merge hard and soft codecs. That is the difficult part, or the potentially challenging part, is building the audio system in such a way that you have a consistent performance and consistent usage on both sides, whether it's a hard codec or a soft codec. So let's jump back to the drawing here real quick. And I'll kind of show you what we did to accommodate that. So on the WebEx Room Kit, like I said, it has mics and speakers built in, but you don't actually have to use those mics and speakers. So in this case, we're actually not using those mics and speakers that are built into the Room Kit, because again, we want to have a seamless experience between hard and soft codecs, or as seamless as possible. And in the WebEx Room Kit, there's no way to tie its internal mics and speakers to an external system. So instead, we go the other way. We take an external system and tie its mics and speakers into the WebEx Room Kit. So if we look up here, and I'll just kind of zoom in, if I can. There we go.
I can make it bigger here as well, so that'll help a little bit for the viewers.
So if we kind of zoom in here a little bit, I've got a DSP shown here, and the picture that I'm showing is a Shure P300, little kind of miniature small room DSP. Frankly, it could be any DSP. It could be a Shure, it could be a Symmetrix, it could be a QSC, Biamp, BSS, whatever. I don't care. Alphabet soup. But we have a DSP here, and the reason we have the DSP here is, again, the DSP is acting as our bridge between hard codec land and soft codec land for mics and speakers. So connected to the DSP, we have the output, one of the outputs of the DSP is going to an amplifier that is then obviously, feeding, the room speakers. But then on one of the inputs of the DSP, if we follow that line down here, we've got that's going to a mic that's sitting on the conference table. So whether you're using the Cisco codec or you're using the soft codec, those are the mics and speakers that are connected to the DSP. Now, on the other side is we've got, the mic input on the WebEx Room Kit is fed by one of the outputs of the DSP, and the line output of the WebEx Room Kit is going back into the DSP as an analog input. So that's how the DSP ties to the WebEx Room Kit for mic and speakers. Now, the next obvious question is, how does it tie to user's computer that's coming and sitting down to use the system for soft codec purposes? And the answer is really simple. So all of these modern DSPs have USB connectivity. So basically what you can do is with this USB-A connector, or I'm sorry, USB-B connector, you can basically plug your computer in, and then what happens is your computer sees the DSP as an echo canceling speakerphone, right?
Sure.
Just as if it were a Jabra puck like the one I'm talking to you on now. Your computer is no smarter, right? It just sees speakers and mics, and it doesn't care. So we basically extend that functionality by connecting the DSP to our little switcher here. And then that switcher via HT-base-T is connected back to the table, and then there's a USB connection for the user right there at the table. So when they come to the table, they plug in their USB connection here. That travels over this HT-base-T connection to our switcher, and then since it's connected up here to the DSP, the user gets mics and speakers. So that's kind of the nutshell of how audio works and how it switches between the WebEx Room Kit and soft codec, but while continuing to use the same speaker and same microphone, or same speakers and same microphone, possibly microphones, for again a consistent user experience.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting, and you may have said this, and I apologize if you did, but I think it's worth noting that not all DSPs are created equal when it comes to their USB functionality, right?
Right.
It is important when speccing a DSP specifically for an application such as this, that that your DSP has, some mechanism, generally USB, for taking that far end audio or the near end audio rather, and converting it, to get it back into whatever your soft or hard codec of choice is.
Right.
That analog to digital conversion, and so yeah, I mean, I say that just from experience of working in systems previously where we sort of discover late in the game, probably too late in the game, that maybe a DSP doesn't have, it doesn't actually have a USB connection. Maybe it's an additional card in some cases, right? I know, like with Symmetrics, for example, there are additional cards you can add. With some of the other ones as well, I think there are additional USB cards that you can add to add that functionality after the fact. But just worth noting there.
Well, I think it's a good point also. Along those same lines is, when you spec the DSP to not just make sure that it has USB connectivity to be able to connect a computer as a speakerphone, or connect to a computer as a speakerphone, but also make sure that it has the appropriate acoustic echo cancellation capabilities.
Yeah.
Because again, as you mentioned with USB functionality, not all DSPs are created equal. And Symmetrics is a beautiful example because the Symmetrics Radius and X DSPs have a single, they have a USB connector on the back that you can use for this capability, and you can add a daughter card in to add a second one if you wanted to. But by default, they do not have acoustic echo cancellation capabilities. You have to add in you have to have Symmetrics add in an internal daughter card, to give ADC capabilities, which is really important to again give the end users, the people using the system, the best experience possible.
Sure. Cool. While we're on this, while we're on your drawing, if you can zoom back out for a second, perfect. I guess, one of the other questions that I wanted to kind of jump into for a second is just this Cisco, this WebEx Room Kit, I think comes with a camera. Is that right? Or is that incorrect?
Nope.
It does come with a camera. Okay. It comes with a camera. So, in what case, I mean, obviously here you have the HDVS cam drawn into the picture. In what case would we actually use the HDVS cam rather than the Cisco camera that the WebEx Room Kit comes with?
It's a good question. And it has application not just here for the WebEx Room Kit, but also for other Cisco systems as well. But the WebEx Room Kit in of itself is sort of a little bit of a unique monster to talk about, because it does have, it's a sound bar format, and it does have a camera smacked right in the middle of that sound bar in a similar fashion to what you would see on like a Logitech Meetup or a Poly Studio or something like that. But the thing that the WebEx Room Kit does not give you is any way to externally access that camera. Right. I kind of mentioned earlier, it doesn't give you any way to access its internal mics and speakers either, but it also doesn't give you any access to the camera. There's a smaller version of the WebEx Room Kit, the WebEx Room Kit Mini, that does give you a USB-C port where you can connect that guy up, and it functions, very much in the same manner as a Poly Studio or Logitech Meetup would. But in the larger, more capable, higher quality WebEx Room Kit, you don't get that capability. So it's sort of like that camera is only usable for Cisco WebEx conferences, right? Cisco teleconferencing. So basically, and again, one of our primary goals here is to make the end user experience as consistent as possible between hard codec and soft codec. And in this case, we have a perfectly seamless, consistent experience for mics and speakers, but because we're not able to access that internal camera on the WebEx Room Kit, we have to have a separate camera for soft codec. So we have the camera that's built into the WebEx Room Kit for hard codec, for Cisco stuff, and then for everything else, we have the HDVS cam. So again, you see this line here from the USB on the HDVS cam going into our switcher, our combo receiver HDMI/USB switcher. And that way, whenever somebody comes in and connects here to this single USB plug, they get both the HDVS cam as well as the mic and speakers from the DSP.
Sure.
Now, the thing that I didn't mention, that I didn't hit on earlier, is I've also got a room PC drawn in here. So, let's say that there's like an Intel NUC or something like that mounted behind the TV. That's directly connected right into this SR21 receiver switcher, and this enables the capability so that you can have someone, if they need to use a soft codec, or if they need to present via the Cisco codec, they can either choose to use the room PC that's built into the room right there, or they can bring their own computer and connect it up to the table, right? They've got that flexibility. And these USB devices will route automatically based on which one of those is the active input.
Cool. Awesome. For those viewers of ours who have gone to do the booth tour already, and some that maybe haven't, that just know our product lines and our roadmap well, may know that we have now also an HDVS cam that has an HDMI output. Is there a scenario here where we could utilize that HDMI output camera as well?
Yeah, there is actually, and you reminded me. I completely forgot. I actually prepared a second drawing, of a more complex, more capable system with a larger Cisco codec. Let me pull that up, and that's a perfect example of a place where that HDVS cam HDMI becomes very, very useful. So let's pull this guy up. So, and then I'll make him go full screen so that you don't see all the other junk in Acrobat. So here in this scenario, this is a bit different of a system and a bit more complex of a system, but also more capable. So here, instead of just having a room PC and the table input, we also have some other inputs, right? I just tossed in a document camera, as an example, but we've also got a couple more inputs that we can potentially have into the system. So maybe you have a Blu-ray player, whatever, it doesn't matter. You have a few more inputs. So we have a more capable switcher here. And then also, instead of everything being shoved in behind the TV, since we have a lot more stuff and the stuff is more capable and the stuff is larger form factor, we have an equipment rack somewhere in the room, or maybe it's not even in the room, maybe it's in a closet somewhere. But again, we have the same idea of same mic and speakers connected via DSP to the Cisco codec. In this case, I grabbed an image of the back panel of a previous generation SX80. But this conversation applies even to the newer systems that have the WebEx RoomKit systems that have standalone processor boxes, like the WebEx RoomKit Plus and the Pro. This whole conversation applies. And in these cases, because with the WebEx RoomKit systems and the older SX80 systems, the camera was actually camera is actually optional, right? You can, unlike the WebEx RoomKit where it has a camera built into it and that's it, period, end of story. Here, you can choose your camera, right? Whether you want a Cisco Precision 60 camera or their quad camera, that's sort of a wide format thing. Whatever, you can choose your camera. And similarly, you can actually choose to not even have a Cisco camera and to use whatever camera you want. With the gotcha being that camera has to give you HDMI. So that's where now we can have one camera with the HDVS cam HDMI here that will actually service both the hard codec and the soft codec. So using some clever routing of HDBaseT, we can actually take that HDMI and USB, both outputs of the camera, which are able to function simultaneously, and using Omega extenders, get that back from the camera back to the equipment rack, and go into our PS62, and then route that camera output back into a camera input on the SX80 or WebEx RoomKit. Oops, sorry about that. I just hit the escape key. And then also have our local sources, like our conference table comes into the switcher, our document camera, our room PC, all these local sources come into the switcher, and then we've got one of the outputs of the switcher driving our Cisco codec, so that we can switch between all of those inputs. Then everything else is pretty similar to the other system where we have the DSP, and that's driving mics and speakers. So basically now, if somebody wants to use the hard codec, then they're using the mics and speakers via the DSP, and they're using the HDVS cam via the HDMI output. And if they want to use soft codec, now they're using mics and speakers via the DSP's USB connection, and they're using the HDVS cam via its USB connection. So there you go.
Sort of in the same vein, this idea idea of moving back and forth between soft codec and hard codec. I mean, how simple is that in a system like this for the end user to switch back and forth between hard codec and soft codec?
Super question.
Like hard codec and soft codec.
Yeah, you know, really hits the nail on the head, so to speak. Again, even in this more complex system, you notice there's only one touch panel. There's only the Cisco Touch 10. We're driving absolutely everything via the Touch 10. And the way that we're doing that is Cisco gives you some capability, basically, you know, to do what they call room control via the Touch 10 through some what I call semi-custom pages. So basically, they give you a GUI builder in the Cisco interface, in the Cisco web GUI, that allows you to place buttons and set up rows and columns and all this stuff. You know, that you can build custom menus on the Touch 10. Now, those custom menus don't really do anything in of themselves other than act as a button to push. But what happens behind the scenes is we, using the Cisco / Velocity integration that we've done, we can make it so that when somebody goes and pushes one of those custom buttons on the Touch 10 interface, it sends a notification to Velocity, and then Velocity can execute you know, an event or a sequence of events you know, based on that button push. So basically, to switch between soft codec and hard codec modes, we just have the user, you know, we would set up a screen on the Touch 10 to do that switch. So that a user just goes in and hits that button, and it tells Velocity to change the system around, to route USB now to either the conference table or the room PC or whatever. So that the system can be used in soft codec mode as opposed to hard codec mode. Simple, intuitive, easy for the end user.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I wanted to know a little bit more about. So thanks. So I guess, you know, let's talk just a little bit more about control. I mean, specifically in this particular system, you know, you have a switcher, a video switcher, really operating kind of upstream from the Cisco codec. You know, how are you controlling that system? How does this, you know, sort of make it a little bit different? Just talk to me a little bit more about the control of the system.
Sure. So, you know, I talked about, you know, the integration that we did so that you can basically make buttons on the Touch 10 that do things that the Cisco system isn't natively capable of,
Sure.
you know, by kind of funneling that through Velocity. Now, input switching is an extension of that capability, but it's almost, in my opinion, a more interesting extension, because basically what we do here is, in the Cisco system, in a codec like the SX80, as an example, the SX80, you know, fundamentally had 4 inputs, right? With 2 of them, you know, really being intended for camera inputs, 1 being intended for HDMI content, and a 4th input being for either DVI or composite content inputs. And if we went back to the WebEx Room Kit, the WebEx Room Kit literally only has 1. It has 1 single HDMI input for content sharing. So how do we do a system like this where we've got more sources than that that we want to connect up? And we do that again through this integration. But here, unlike with the in-room control integration, where we're building new screens on the Touch 10 to do all that in-room control stuff, here it's absolutely completely seamless to the end user. So basically what we do is we go in and set up the Cisco system so that when you go into the share tray, as an example, on the Touch 10, instead of seeing the inputs, you know, as an example, instead of seeing this one input on the, what happened? Oh, there we go. Instead of seeing this one,
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Instead of seeing this one input on the Touch 10, we actually see all of the different inputs that we have configured on the upstream switcher. So instead of seeing input 1 and that's it on the Touch 10, you go into the share tray and we would see this conference table input, we would see this document camera input, and we would see this room PC input. And they show up absolutely the same as if they were 100% native to the Cisco. Input presence detection is preserved. You know, so it lights up if somebody plugs into it, so you can click on share. If somebody unplugs, then now you can't click on it anymore, all that kind of stuff. So it's absolutely seamless to the end user.
Very cool. Yeah. So what I was doing over here was I just wanted to queue up a couple of websites that I was going to share here in just a minute, and we'll get to that in just a second. One of which talks about the Cisco telepresence integration, you know, that you're talking about in terms of control. Yeah, but thank you. That makes a lot of sense. You know, guys, I'll show you guys this for the viewers. I'll show you this website shortly. And if you check that website out, Nick actually has a video there where he kind of walks through, you know, maybe a little bit more extensively and in more of a sort of active demo scenario, what this sort of a system would look like. So definitely a really cool integration that we offer. You know, I guess, you know, we probably have time for maybe 2 more questions or something. I mean, you know, one question that I'd be curious of, you know, if I'm an integrator looking at this, I mean, this looks like a really cool system, but I think like one of the questions that's on a lot of integrators' minds is exactly how long does it take to deploy a system like this, right? Is this something that's going to take, I mean, it seems somewhat involved, especially considering, you know, we're integrating, you know, control sort of stuff into the Cisco Touch 10 system, you know, and so I guess, like, you know, kind of $10 million question on everybody's mind is how long does it take to deploy something like this, right?
Sure. No, it's appropriate. So it's I think, you know, I'm guessing probably most of the people watching this with or, you know, or that are on with us, you know, have a reasonably decent understanding of how long it would take to install or deploy either or, right? You know, a system that, you know, is a hard codec system or a system that's a soft codec system. But, you know, what's it take to deploy one of these sort of integrated systems that is a hard plus a soft codec? It's an absolutely spectacular question. And, you know, the answer, you know, for these Cisco systems is it's not actually that hard. You know, we've, again, with this integration effort that we did between Cisco and Velocity, we put a good bit of work into trying to make that flow as easy as possible. So if I kind of walk through it a bit backwards from how we talked about things, you know, a minute ago, you know, and talk about input switching first and then room control stuff second. Basically, what happens for inputs for input switching, you know, you would, once you get everything hooked up and cabled up and everything, and I have no idea why I just went so fuzzy. There we go. Once you have everything cabled up and ready to go, then you go into the Cisco system and you tell the Cisco system, hey, instead of using your local input, I'm using an upstream switcher, and that upstream switcher has, you know, 3 inputs, and I'm going to label them table, document camera, room PC, right? Whatever it is.
Sure.
And then you turn around and you go into your Velocity system and you tell Velocity to query the Cisco system, and it goes, they talk amongst themselves, and bada bing, bada boom. Now, all of a sudden, you know, 1.5 seconds later, on your velocity interface, you actually see those external sources that you've configured on the Cisco side, and then you just assign them to inputs on the switcher. So that part of it is literally like minutes. I mean, it's super quick, super easy. For the in-room control stuff, where we're going into the Touch 10 and building these semi-custom interfaces with custom buttons to do custom things. Basically, the process there is somewhat similar, slightly different, but similar in that you go in, you build the interface through the Cisco web GUI. When you're done, you basically export that interface as an XML, and that XML just basically lists all of the buttons and their identifiers, that you've built. And then you go into Velocity, dump that XML in, and now you've got all of those buttons listed in Velocity that you can assign macros to. So now you can basically just with a simple intuitive drop and click interface, you can assign macros, assign sequences of events and commands to occur whenever somebody presses a button on the Cisco, and also when somebody releases a button on the Cisco, if you want there to be different operations for both of those functions. So that takes a little bit longer than doing the external source stuff, because there's just in a typical system like this, you would have more things, more of those buttons to configure, because you would have a toggle button for soft versus hard codec mode, and you would have all of your PTZ controls for the HTTPS cam that you would want to program in, and I mean, let's call it a dozen, right?
Sure.
A dozen controls for PTZ control. So it's a dozen things that you're going to have to go and choose what you want it to do on the velocity side. But is it hours? I don't think so. Especially not, once you've done your first one and see how easy it is both on the Cisco side and the velocity side to kind of execute this sort of system.
Right. Yeah. It seems like certainly the sort of variable aspect of how long would something like this take to deploy would probably be more of how much you already know about integrating Cisco.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like when I did my first my first sort of example custom screen on the Touch 10, I think doing that took me front to back maybe an hour. But that was kind of figuring out from scratch, how to do all this stuff. Kind of purposefully, I was almost purposefully not leveraging, some of the help files and tutorial things that we have published, just because I wanted to get a feel for how easy or difficult is this really for somebody, jumping off the deep end. And like that, maybe an hour and a half with, obviously I had a good understanding of how to use Velocity and a decent understanding of how to use the Cisco stuff going in, but how to make the two play together, not that much. But now that I've done it once, I feel pretty confident I could go and build that kind of thing in much, much, much less time.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, I just want to give a quick heads up to the viewers. So far, I haven't seen any comments pop in or any questions pop in, which is why we haven't really, why we're kind of still going back and forth here. If you have a question, you got, let's call it like maybe another 5 or 10 minutes probably to ask that. In the meantime, I did come up with another question I wanted to ask you, Nick, and that is really. So in a soft codec environment, right? If I'm thinking about, getting on a Zoom meeting with my buddies while we've been doing the whole COVID thing, or whether it's a work meeting or whatever it is. I know it's easy for me as sort of sort of a remote joinee, if you will, into this meeting to share my content, right? I can go and I can hit my share content button. But if I'm walking into this room, how am I sharing content, or how does this differ if I want to add sort of a local sharing option? Does that make sense? How do I locally share my content?
Yeah, and that's all kind of built into the Cisco like interface, so to speak. And off the top of my head, I can't remember. Obviously, if you're in a call, if you're in a WebEx, basically a WebEx meeting, there's Cisco calls it a share tray. I can't remember what they call it on the main screen, but if like you wanted to walk in and just use the system like locally, without being in a WebEx meeting, then there's a, can't remember if they call it the share tray on the main page, or if it's called like a preview, something like that. But basically, you can go and throw up local content on the screen without having to actually be in an engaged, meeting. So that's kind of how that would work.
Sure. Okay. All right. I guess so. Let's throw this one out there last. Is there? You talked kind of briefly about the Cisco Touch 10. The idea that this system comes with, when you buy the Cisco WebEx Room Kit, it comes with a Touch 10. Is there an option to utilize either a third party or an Atlona touch panel instead of the Touch 10?
Yeah, that's there really isn't, and the reason I say that is because really there is and there isn't, right? Definitely you could take an Atlona touch panel and put it into a system like this, say instead of the Touch 10, and make it do 90% of the things that the Touch 10 are doing, that the Touch 10 does. The problem that we run into there with that kind of approach, there's two problems, right? Two problems. And the first problem is expense, right? Let's back up to problem zero, right? Problem zero is we're only going to have one touch panel in the room, right? No end user wants to walk into the room and see more than one touch panel. They don't want to see a Cisco Touch 10 and an Atlona touch panel sitting on the table, or a Touch 10 sitting on the table and an Atlona, mounted in the wall. They no, that's a surefire way to get end users pissed off and just not using the system. So there's going to be one control surface in the room. So problem number one with not using the Touch 10 is you already got the Touch 10, right? All of the WebEx room kits, by nature of them being room kits, they come with Touch 10s. So you've already invested as an integrator and also as the end user. You've already invested in that Cisco Touch 10 hardware. So that's kind of thing number one. Thing number two is, especially if we're using this, heavily for hard codec use, all of the hard codec functionality is already built into the Touch 10. There's really nothing that, as the integrator, that you have to do in order to make this thing work for hard codec functionality.
Sure.
And I think I'm sort of making a predictive assumption that most of these systems where we're trying to merge hard and soft codecs they're not going to see 50-50 usage, right? It's not going to be 50% of the time they're going to use hard codecs and 50% of the time it's going to be soft codecs. It's going to be more like 70-30, where more often than not they're going to be using the hard codec functionality, with the soft codec functionality taking a little bit of a backseat, not too much, like I said, 70-30, 65-35, something like that. But we definitely want the end user to have the absolute best experience possible for hard codecs. And just because of the way that Cisco exposes, or rather doesn't expose, absolutely everything that you can do via their third-party API, the Touch 10 is always going to be a more capable interface, for that system. So instead of taking the Touch 10 that has the better interface for the hard codec and and making it do soft codec stuff, but we have to do a little bit of work in order to build those custom screens. The other option would be using an Atlona panel and going the inverse. But again, because of those two things, we really don't see that being a thing that's going to happen very often. Most of the time, and most probably because of reason number one is, people are going to want to just use the Touch 10 because they got it. It's there. It's already paid for.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Nick. I'm going to jump back over here to the screen view, and I'm actually going to share my screen this time, just really quick, and I guess I can go full screen here for the viewers. I just wanted to show two websites really quick. The first one is atlona.com/velocity-cisco-telepresence. This is our landing page for our integration with the Cisco telepresence stuff. Here's a little this overview video. This was a video that you did that Nick did at Cisco Live 2019. So take a look at that if you're curious to learn a little bit more. And then the other one I was going to go to was just simply our Omega landing page. Pretty much every video and USB matrix that Nick was showing today was part of our Omega line. And we have, products beyond what he showed as well in the Omega line that for the viewers that you guys may be interested in. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is part of our Atlona.com booth as well. But I just wanted to throw these two websites out there just so that you guys could learn a bit more. All right. All right. Well, I think that's about it. I still don't see any comments or questions. With that, I want to thank everybody again for taking the time to hang out with us and geek out a little bit. Nick, thank you for your expertise on this topic and for taking time to chat. Just a quick reminder for everybody that we do have a whole series of on-demand webinars that are relatively short in length, as well as more tech talks coming up this week at this time every single day, by the way. For more information on all the products we've discussed in this live discussion, please visit atlona.com. And don't forget to schedule a booth tour to see the latest and greatest that we have to offer. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.